Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the Small Business Virtual Town Hall meeting organised by Nathaniel Smith MP, the member for Wallandilly. My name is Randall Walker. I'm delighted to be your host this evening. I deliver the Entrepreneurship Facilitators program through Southern Region Business Enterprise Centre and interact with Nathaniel and most of you as the facilitator through the Southern Highlands Key Stakeholders Group. And I'd just like to acknowledge Hugh Clark as the chair. And in terms of this evening, very quickly about the webinar format, as people are logging on and participating, I'll introduce the panelists shortly. There is a Q&A channel, and if you would like to ask a question, you will be identified as the person asking the question, only if it's able to be answered by perhaps our representatives from Service New South Wales tonight. If there's an answer, then the question and the answer will be available to everyone. If we can't answer your question for any reason this evening, it will be responded to in the next few business days. We also will have some poll questions just to get a snapshot of where things are at in the marketplace and the regional economy. And I'll introduce the panelists shortly. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to acknowledge that our virtual meeting this evening is taking place across the traditional country of Aboriginal language groups. And on behalf of all of us, I offer our respect to their emerging elders past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of acknowledging some wonderful people in the community that volunteer their time to lead chambers of commerce and keep their finger on the pulse and help small business, the largest employer, the backbone of the Australian economy, I'd like to acknowledge from Business Illawarra, Adam Zarth is online, from Appin Chamber of Commerce, Lauren Eade, from Mossvale and Rural Chamber of Commerce, Bridget Kennedy, from Picton Chamber of Commerce, Joanne Bentley, from Southern Highlands Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Steve Horton, from Wallandilly Tourism Association, Lynn Davey, and Wallandilly Women in Business, Brooke Hilton. I'd also like to acknowledge that the new General Manager of Wingecarribee Shire Council, Lisa Miscampbell, is online. Welcome, Lisa. So what a fantastic lineup Nathaniel's organised with the panellists this evening. I'd like to welcome the Minister, the Honourable Victor Dominello, MP, first appointed to the ministry in 2011 and is now the Minister for Digital and the Minister for Customer Service. Victor has been the member for RIDE since 2008 and is the responsible Minister for Service New South Wales. He's also a key member of the New South Wales COVID Subcommittee of Cabinet. And of course, the Commissioner for Small Business, Chris Lamont, well known in the Southern Highlands, having recently released his report at Centennial Vineyards, along with Adam. And Chris, New South Wales Small Business Commissioner since June 2020, and you have experience in both the public and private sectors, having held executive positions in federal, state and local government. And also you have a link to the region as you were the previous Executive Director for Business Illawarra. So welcome again, Chris. And of course, Nathaniel, who's organised this evening and a very proactive, vocal Member of Parliament for the residents of Wallandilly, the member since 2019. Nathaniel's owned and operated his own small business as a licensed plumber before becoming an advisor to government and then a politician. So I suppose, Nathaniel, a licensed plumber, it's probably a pay cut to then serve the people of the community. Thank you very much for organising tonight, Nathaniel, and over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Randall, and very common it happens at these Zoom meetings when we mute or unmute ourselves. I'd like to thank Minister Dominello. I've known him for a very long time, worked on his first campaign in 2008.
Very true. And
it was a record swing at 23% from memory in that by-election. And thank you, Chris, and all the work that you've done down here in the Southern Highlands. And I want to thank you, Randall, for hosting tonight, and our two volunteers from Service New South Wales who are going to answer lots of technical questions that send us into a bit of a dizzy time from time to time in our electorate offices, as our EOs have become an extension of Service New South Wales during this whole process. And I also like to acknowledge Adam Zarth, Lauren Eade, Bridget Kennedy, Joanne Bentley. I know with Jeff O'Brien, who's the former president of the Picton Chamber. Joanne Bentley's just taken over. Steve Horton, Lynn from Wallandilly Tourism, and Brooke Hilton, and everyone else from other organisations that are joining us here tonight. I regularly meet with the presidents of your Chamber of Commerce, so please get involved with your chambers. I regularly meet up with them in my office, and now that we're in lockdown, we've been meeting via Zoom and other forms of communication. So when they come to me with issues, I go directly to Victor, to the Treasurer, to Damien Tudhope, the Small Business Minister, and their concerns are heard. Obviously, it's been a tough time in Wallandilly and Widgecarriby. We've had drought, we've had bushfire, we've had floods, we've had COVID, we had floods again, and now COVID Delta strand has come back. And it's put a lot of pressure on our businesses, which a lot of businesses in Wallandilly and Widgecarriby rely on the visitor economy coming down here for tourism. So they've had a pretty tough time over the last few years. I occasionally say the last 2 years have been a bit like a scene out of Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments of the 7 Plagues of Egypt. We've had everything from, locusts coming down from Western Sydney, stealing our supplies at Coles and Woolworths at the start of this pandemic last year. But it has been pretty full on, but the community is a resilient community, and they've been fighting hard and helping each other out, which we saw during the fires and other natural disasters in this area. Obviously, in Wallandilly, I've been very proactive in the media and locally about getting Widgecarriby and Wallandilly out of lockdown as soon as possible. Obviously, the Crisis Cabinet in the next few days will be deciding on regional LGAs, and I'm very much praying and hoping that Widgecarriby is released. We've had very few cases down here in Widgecarriby, and we've got extremely high vaccination rates and testing rates, some of the highest in the country. And obviously also in Wallandilly, I believe we're in the 72 to 73% in terms of vaccinations, and we have lower rates of COVID-19 than Shell Harbour or the Central Coast LGAs, which now have been classified as regional. So I've been pushing very hard. The way we don't have the big supermarkets like MacArthur Square, Narellan Town Centre, Miranda, Westfields, a lot of our shops are local, people shop local. We've been able to handle the COVID crisis quite well. People have been called out to get vaccinated, and they are in record numbers. So I'm making my case again to Minister Dominello, who's going in tomorrow, the COVID cabinet, to try and get Wallandilly out, because we've gone through it, and Widgecarriby, because we've gone through a pretty tough time over the last 2 years. And the community respects the health orders, and they're doing the right thing. And we've had no real outbreaks and exposure sites in those 2 LGAs. Obviously, tonight, one of the things that we've been talking about, I want to quickly go through the 3 grants of the Service New South Wales, so I'll share the screen. So this is the Service New South Wales website, the homepage. A lot of people in my office regularly come to me for assistance with the grants, but before the grants during the bushfires, we were obviously helping a lot of people get registered with Service New South Wales, because they were going through a pretty tough time, a lot of PTSD and other stress from that natural disaster. And so our office was helping, we were hands-on helping them, and we still are now. So when you go down the page, just if you need to show someone else who's having trouble connecting on to get business assistance, you click on COVID-19 Help for Businesses, and then you scroll down again and you compare the grants. Now, this is important. There's 3 lots of grants. Obviously, 2 grants sort of joined together, which are the JobSaver payment and the COVID-19 business grants. The JobSaver payment obviously is anywhere from a weekly payment of $1,500 to $100,000, depending on the size of your business and your headcount. And that opened on the 18th of July. And then you go across to the COVID-19 grant, which is a one-off payment of $7,500 to $15,000, depending on your turnover and decline when COVID wasn't active in 2009. It goes back to 2019. And then we have the COVID-19 micro business grant, which no other jurisdiction is doing in the country. New South Wales is the first to jump on this, to assist businesses between $30,000 and $75,000, which is a lot of partnerships, a lot of people who work from home and run their own business who have been affected, and they've had to stay at home and haven't been able to get an income. Obviously, there was a bit of a delay in some of these grants originally, as the minister put it a couple of weeks ago on the 11 o'clock press conference. It was like flying a plane and building it at the same time. And that was probably one of the best ways of explaining it. We're in a new world. We've never had a pandemic like this. The last one was 100 years ago, there being the Spanish flu. So we had to build things on the run. And Service New South Wales is a magnificent organisation. I'm always praising it in the House and wherever I go. They do a magnificent job down our Service New South Wales, down at Mittagong, and obviously our mobile van that goes around the electorate. And as you can see here, this is the eligibility criteria for the 3 grants, but remember 2 of them are joined together, being the COVID-19 business grant and JobSaver payment, and the COVID-19 micro business grant is separate. Now, the important thing is for people who haven't applied yet is the closing dates. You must do this by the 18th of October for the micro business, and the COVID-19 grant, which is the 13th of September. So that date is fast approaching. And if businesses haven't applied for that grant, please do that as soon as possible. And the JobSaver payment continues to the 18th of October. Now, some of the people online in this webinar tonight may have some technical questions, and that's why we have our wonderful volunteers from Service New South Wales working 24 hours a day. You can ask those technical questions in writing, and hopefully we can get you some good answers. So now I'll stop the share and I'll pass it back to Randall to introduce our next panellist.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel. And the Minister has kindly arranged for 2 members of the team from Service New South Wales to be available online during this webinar this evening. So welcome very much to Belgan and Felice. Thank you so much for being online. Questions are starting to come through on the Q&A. And if Belgan or Felice are able to answer those questions once an answer has been loaded in, then it will be available question and answer for all to see. If we can't get an answer organised for you tonight, we will take it on notice and the team will get back to you. So I'll hand over to the Minister. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here for this meeting this evening, Minister, and we know that your team is very overworked at the moment trying to roll out the response. So thank you very much to the efforts of all of the staff at Service New South Wales. But over to you, Minister.
Oh, thanks, Randall. And can I also thank Nathaniel? Nathaniel, you have got one of the hardest, most dedicated people I know. And I can say that from first-hand experience. I remember when he helped me out on the campaign, he does the work. He's about the size of 10 people. He's a man now. He's a man-mountain, that bloke, but he also does the work of about 10 people. Like, he is phenomenal, and you're very, very blessed to have him as your local MP. He's always fighting for you, and he's always agitating to try and get the best outcome. Even now, he's still pressing the case in relation to getting restrictions eased, but again, that's a matter for health and the cabinet more broadly. But so thank you, Nathaniel, for inviting me. Also to Chris Lamont, he's only new in the job, but my God, he's kicking goals. And so thank you for joining us. And to Service New South Wales more broadly, but specifically to Belgan and Felice, like, seriously, I brought the Top Gun squadron tonight. These 2 are just sensational. They are true A-graders, and I know they are working around the clock, as you said, Nathaniel. I've been with them all day, virtually, in calls, and the fact that they're still fronting up tonight at 6:30. So thank you to Belgan and Felice. But I'm happy to, kick off more broadly or just take any questions that might come along, because as you said, Randall, there is so much that Service is doing. When we envisaged Service New South Wales in 2011, it was on the basis that the old RTA, RMS was, quite frankly, suboptimal in service delivery. You'd rock up to those places and they'd have the Perspex screens, and this was pre-COVID. They'd probably be on trend now in COVID, but pre-COVID, Perspex screens wasn't a great look. The plastic bucket chairs, I remember those. They weren't comfortable either. And what was far, far worse was just waiting for hours and hours to get stuff done. Service came along. We opened the first one up in Kiama in 2013. And then it's seriously going from strength to strength. Who would have thought? Let me ask you this question. Can you imagine the government's response to the pandemic without Service New South Wales? And the answer is probably no. That's how integral it is. They are right up there in terms of health, police, and again, service. They are just central to ensuring that we put the people first, the customer first in New South Wales. And we've got a lot more in the pipeline in terms of what we will deliver between now and the end of the year. But happy to take any questions. And if they are, super detailed, I know that my team will absolutely answer the questions.
Thank you, Minister. Some people had submitted questions prior, which is fantastic, as well as some questions that will come up through the Q&A chat. A question that was submitted, Minister, through Steve Horton, the President of Southern Highlands Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in terms of the disruption that has occurred, and as Nathaniel alluded to, drought and then bushfires and then floods and then COVID. It certainly has been taking its toll relentlessly on small businesses.
Yeah.
And the question from Steve was around how essential it is for small businesses to try and be able to plan for the future. So we know that the uncertainty factor is a big part of it. And Steve had just asked, will there be a roadmap at some point in time that may have a timeline and the criteria of what will be expected of businesses to be able to take advantage of customers returning?
Yeah, thanks, Randall, and thanks, Steve, for the question. It's a fair question. I gave the example recently that, if you provide hope, it's like providing a ladder out of the dark hole. But if you don't provide rungs on the ladder, all you have is two slippery poles. So we need to make sure that we get that roadmap. We are working on it. I'm part of the task force. The Deputy Premier is leading it. But myself, the Treasurer, Mr. Ayres, and then we're framing it up now with industry, literally as we speak. We're just putting the final touches to it. Then we have to get health to make sure they put a lens over it, to make sure we don't do anything that's going to aggravate the situation in terms of a very challenging situation, particularly with our public hospital system at the moment. And then hopefully that roadmap will be released very, very soon, very, very soon. But the Premier has already pretty much indicated where it's going to be. Once we get to that 70% target based on the Doherty modelling and then the 80%, there will be significant freedoms to those that are vaccinated. That's as simple as that. You would have heard reporting around, pubs, clubs, hairdressers, the whole lot. Everything comes into play at 70%. It won't be exactly like it was before the pandemic, because the reality is, even at 70%, we are still in a pandemic environment where the virus is still circulating around. So there will be mask wearing, there will be restrictions in relation to square metres, et cetera, but the reality is it will be a very large step into getting back to as normal as humanly possible. So just hang in there, because we know that business needs that certainty, but there is one absolute certainty, that New South Wales has from day one been the state that has adopted the pro-business open posture. We've been the one carrying the load for the country in relation to bringing people back. We've been the ones to first open up to business. We've been the ones that are the last to lock down. And we got criticised in relation to Delta, but the reality is Victoria had the very quick, fast lockdown. They tried that and that didn't work. The reality is, once Delta's seeded, it's nowhere around the world has put the genie back in the bottle. So we know how important business is, and know how important they are, how hard they are hurting. So just hang in there. It is literally a matter of days away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. And the questions are coming through thick and fast, and some of them are detailed. We'll see how we go. But we'll just go to Chris Lamont now. And again, thank you very much, Chris, for being available this evening, and welcome back in the Southern Highlands, even though it's virtual. And over to you.
Thanks, Randall, and thank you, Minister and Nathaniel, for the opportunity. I guess 3 points from me tonight, because a lot of the questions may well be very technical and best addressed to service. But Small Business Commission Independent Statutory Office, a website for small businesses, smallbusiness.nsw.gov.au. That's the Commission's website. It has information at a summary level on each of the grant and support assistance packages that the New South Wales and the Australian government has announced, but also some Q&A. We've tried to not replace service, but actually provide a funnel into service. So if you're looking for information at a higher level, please have a look at my website. A plea, I guess, we do a lot of work with service, and one of the things that we hear from business and we hear from service is that business really need to take the time to understand the support packages that are available from the state and the federal government, and understand that you may be eligible for more than one. So there are more, last count, I think, Minister, there are more than 30 different support packages provided by the New South Wales government. But also there are the packages of support for the Australian government. And programs that might be titled JobSaver don't mean that you have to spend that grant on paying wages. So please take the time to understand where your business fits in terms of the eligibility and the options that are available. Also, as I think Randall, it might have been the Minister, mentioned, the time periods are flexible in the sense of the assessment. So we understand that 2020 was a horrible year. 2019 was hopefully a little bit better for some businesses. So there is the eligibility or the capacity rather to use an alternate reporting period to calculate a 30+% drop in revenue. Finally, from me, the mediation service that the Commission offers. So these are mediations done between tenants and landlords, or mediations between business to business. So despite what you might read in the press, not all landlords are terrible and not all tenants are delinquent. But at times, both sides have difficulty in nutting out what an arrangement or a negotiation might look like to get them to the other side of COVID. So my office provides a mediation service to really look at where the National Code of Leasing might assist both parties. And there are support available for landlords in terms of a hardship grant, which will provide up to $3,000 per month, and waivers of land tax for landlords as well. So really implore people to look at the mediation services offered by the Commission. Can I say to you that 90% of the matters that we hear will settle on or before mediation. So there is genuine goodwill to get an arrangement and to get an agreement, and my team, which are based right across the state, can assist small businesses and landlords through that service. So happy to help, and a number two that my team will put on the chat to talk to the Commission staff, 1300 795 534. So if in doubt, don't hesitate to give the Commission a call and we'll help out wherever we can. Back to you, Randall, and thank you again for the opportunity tonight.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And again, some of the questions obviously very important to the people asking them. There's an element of detail and we certainly understand if we need to get back to people. But Commissioner, is it correct that if a landlord is dealing with a situation where the tenant is unable to pay, the landlord may be able to get an offset against their land tax?
That's absolutely correct, Randall. So two things to take into consideration. So there is, earlier this week actually, there was an announcement around hardship grants for landlords. So landlords are primarily relying upon income from tenancies. So there's a special hardship program that will soon be released. It was announced earlier this week, but will soon be released on that. But also, yes, waivers of land tax for landlords rather, that offer support and assistance to tenants.
Fantastic, thank you. And a question from Jeff O'Brien to Nathaniel and the Minister. Does the Minister and our local member support the fast tracking of the Picton bypass as a stimulus for COVID recovery?
Well, the Picton bypass, I don't know if the Minister is well aware of the project.
Not across the detail, no.
Well, I'd welcome your support and in lobbying Andrew Constance to speed up any future funding There was a consultation done not too long ago, and obviously that's now with the department. At the present moment, we've got a consultation open with the widening of Picton Road, which is critical for business, especially linking the Hume Highway with Port Kembla and the Illawarra, as we're going to see 15,000 homes built at Wilton over the next 20 years, and then connecting obviously Hume Highway to the airport through the orbital. So that's a big project that's open for discussion at the moment. Obviously, the consultation has been done with Picton Bypass. I continue to push. During the fires, we had a 2 to 3 hour delay on Remembrance Drive. If the winds changed, we could have had many, many fatalities. And we were very lucky on the 19th of December that didn't happen. And one of the problems is it's a one road out and single lane bridge on Victoria Bridge. And I'll continually to push the Minister to get funding for the option that was selected through that consultation. And I'll keep pushing.
Fantastic, thank you. A very good question from Adam, Business Illawarra, and of course Adam and the other chambers have been advocating very strongly for outcomes, and of course we recently had the report from the Commissioner, which was well received by industry. Adam was just asking, Minister, would you be able to share more about the work Service New South Wales is doing to incorporate vaccination status into the app? And could you share some thoughts in relation to the role businesses will play in the frontline enforcement of any requirements? And go to the Minister, and then Chris, if you have any follow-up comments.
Well, thanks for the question. Like it seems to be the topic du jour at the moment, because obviously it's going to be critical to a successful exit strategy from this pandemic. What industry has told us time and time again is they want to make sure that it's a good customer experience as people go into venues. The last thing people want is to, for example, going into a pub. Imagine if you're 18, 19, 20, you look young, they say, what's your ID? You know, show them your driver's license, or maybe your service digital driver's license to show your age. Then you're going to have to check in, different app, you know, ideally through the service app. And then they say, show us your Vax passport. Again, you have to show them either your document or your Medicare app. So that's 3 different apps or documents, if you will, just in order to get your front foot into the pub. Shocking customer experience. You know, in that environment, industry knows, as you know, better than anybody else, compliance is going to be very poor. If things are hard to do, people won't do it. It's as simple as that. But if we can make the experience really seamless, and that's what Service is great at, well then compliance will be strong, and that way we can keep people safer. So what we're doing is we're working really well with Minister Roberts. I want to give him a shout out, Mr. Stu Robert from the federal government. He's really been collaborative on this. And he's basically going to share the data with us. And when I say share with us, that's subject to the individual's consent, because that's not my data, it's the individual's data. So provided they go into their Medicare app, they then will be able to say, yes, I'm prepared for my vaccine certificate that sits on my Medicare app to go down into my service app. And essentially then, you know, with a bit of magic, that gets integrated into your QR check-in experience. So when you check in, it will have, Victor Dominello vaccinated, and then it'll say tick, he's now checked in. So that's how that experience will work. We're getting the information, the pipe, as it were, from the feds in the last week of September. We'll do some testing on that. And then we'll have some pilots operational for the first 2 weeks of October. And then subject to, you know, when we hit the 70% in the roadmap, we can then roll out statewide. But, you know, it's not just New South Wales that's doing this. Every other state and territory have their own app, they'll be doing their own thing. But New South Wales will be the first cab off the rank, as it were, because of our digital maturity, and because, you know, we've got a lot of runs on the board in this space. So the feds are definitely working with us to try and get it out. I think, does that answer all the questions, Randall?
Yes, thank you, Minister. And we might go to the Commissioner. Would you have a comment, Chris? The second part of the question, the impact if businesses are called upon to play a frontline enforcement role. Would you have a comment on that, Chris?
Well, I really think it depends on the business, Randall, and the Minister gave the example of, a pub, which I think is actually easier to some extent to enforce because there is an age limit there. We've worked very well with police in the current climate to say, hey, we don't want the local retailer trying to be a bouncer. Basically, they, if someone is not doing the right thing, they call the police. Yep. So they encourage, they do everything they can to ensure compliance, but we don't want people crash tackling anyone. We don't want arguments in stores, and we don't want disputes in stores. So I think, and I'll defer to the Minister here, but I think the intention is that store owners, with the exception possibly of licensed premises, just do everything they can. If you have someone who's basically not playing by the rules, whatever the rules are at that stage, then police will have a role in enforcement. But I think that's the understanding, Minister, of where we're going with this.
Yeah, you're right, Chris, and thank you. I knew there was two parts to the question, and I omitted the second part, so thank you. You're right. So in terms of compliance now, the same settings will exist in relation to what happens with the vaccine certificate, i.e. right now, they're under the public health orders, you're required to sign in. And there are people that don't, and whether I go to Woolworths, Coles, IGET, whatever it is, if people refuse to sign in, that's an offence under the Public Health Act. And we don't expect, staff, particularly frontline staff, to put themselves in harm's way. We expect the people to do the right thing, and if they don't do the right thing, the police are just a phone call away, literally. Remember, this opening up, particularly at the 70% mark, is for vaccinated people only. Obviously, in supermarket situations, food, etc., that will be for everybody. But in terms of the industries that will be opening up with the requirement for vaccines, certificate being shown, they will be very closely linked with the law enforcement agencies, because we're not going to tolerate people bullying their way into stores and doing the wrong thing.
Fantastic. Thank you for those responses. Just in relation to the very quick polls that we were going to offer this evening, and I'll just activate that now if there's an opportunity for the participants online. It is anonymous, unlike the questions that you ask. If you do respond to the polls, it's completely anonymous. And we were just very quickly asking if your business income is down by more than 50% at the present time. And certainly asking, are you optimistic at all about the post-lockdown bounce back? We know that last year, many businesses experienced June as their worst ever trading month in the history of the business. And then the absolute juxtaposition was that July then became the best ever trading month in the history of the business. So hopefully we do have that very strong bounce back November, December and onwards. So just asking people if they are optimistic about that bounce back. And then the final question was just in relation to grants, who has successfully received a grant or waiting for application approval or not eligible or haven't applied yet, or have been unsuccessful with their application. So that's just three poll questions for participants. Lauren has sent through some big questions, and I'll put it to the Minister and then ask Chris if he would like to add any comments to it. Lauren's very proactive, and we work together on the Regional New South Wales Task Force with Nathaniel. Lauren's asking if an employer encourages their staff to be vaccinated to help the business and the interaction with customers, is the employer liable if the employee has an adverse reaction to the vaccination? And the reason that Lauren's asking is just in relation to the implications around insurance. And the second part to her question is, why does the vaccine injury, why would a vaccine injury incident fall under workers' compensation? when it's really being required through the New South Wales state government. So obviously they're very detailed questions,
Yeah,
Minister. I don't envy
I-
your response, but I can see that it's important to employers. So I hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for the question. It is. And look, this is one of the areas where the federal government are still working their way through. We know that the Fair Work Commission has already gone out there and said, look, there's a matrix in terms of the requirement for employees to get vaccinated. And I think, for an example, if you're a frontline employee and you're dealing with customers all the time, and your employer says you must get vaccinated, in those circumstances, if you don't, my understanding is that the employer is absolutely within his rights or her rights or its rights to terminate the contract of employment, and people move on because you're not fit for purpose for the job. If you're a white collar worker and you can work from home and you're not in a high risk environment where you're meeting a lot of people, then there's a real question mark as whether the employer has the right to say you must get vaccinated. So you can see how there's going to be a gradation in relation to where the employer sits vis-a-vis their relationship with the employee in terms of vaccination. If you're high risk, obviously the employer has an obligation to keep its staff safe and it's their customers safe. That's their number one obligation. That's under every state jurisdiction and federal in relation to occupational health. So, and part of that component is, get vaccinated where you can. But again, if there is situations where that doesn't apply, it won't be required. And I give the example in relation to smoking. Remember how in the bad old days, if you were a smoker, you could smoke indoors. And then we realised that smoking passive smoking caused cancer. So then the laws changed to say, sorry, you're not allowed to smoke in office environments anymore, go outside. Because if you smoke indoors, sure, that's your individual right and freedom, but every time you smoke, you're potentially causing passive smoking to your work colleague, and they don't consent to that, and that's causing them or potentially causing them injury. So that's where I think that territory is. In terms of the liability, the federal government have already indicated that they would underwrite any liability in the event that there is a claim. And in relation to workers' comp, we are currently looking at that situation literally as we speak. In relation to what would apply. For example, if it was a requirement for work for you to get vaccinated, and you're one of those rare incidents where you do have an impact, well then ordinarily under standard workers' compensation principles, you would think that you would automatically be covered anyway. But we are working to clarify that situation.
Thank you, Minister. And over to the Commissioner, Chris, just that concept where it may become a burden on the employer in relation to workers' compensation, perhaps premiums will go up. Is it reasonable? Should it be changed?
Thanks, Randall. Well, to add to what the Minister said, there are a lot of things being considered in this space at the moment, and workers' comp is one of them. Indeed, I've had a few papers to the government looking at some options in this space. I think the issue needs to be understood, though. At the moment, the priority is very much getting everyone who can get vaccinated, because no matter what your claim is going to be, even for staff who might contract COVID, the liability is going to be limited or restricted to the extent to those that are fundamentally unvaccinated. So that's the first priority. But I think watch this space over the next few months as both the feds consider some of these issues, but more importantly, we get to the target, as the Minister said, and we are more able to be more flexible in terms of regulations that might be able to change to the public good. So I think it's a little too early at this stage. The Minister might disagree with me, but it might be a little bit too early to be binary about these sorts of issues at this stage, because you really need to understand what opens first, what the impact is on the community, and what the residual risk is. So I think you'll see a fair bit over the next couple of months on this, Randall.
I'll just quickly share a snapshot on the polls before we come back to some questions. Just in relation to the first question, is your income down by more than 50%? Perhaps not surprising, but it is still a very big figure, 68% of those people online this evening. And I think within the context of many small businesses, whatever their revenue is during normal periods, after all expenses are taken out, they often operate at 10% net profit. So obviously any business that's near 50% or more than 50%, it is catastrophic. And in relation to the second question about being optimistic about a bounce back, 43% said yes and 21% said no and 36% are not sure. And in relation to question 3, have you received any form of grant funding? Very encouraging, Minister. 43% have already received funding.
Excellent.
And 18% are waiting on approval. 32% are not eligible, and I've got a question to come to in that in a moment. And 14% haven't applied yet, and Nathaniel shared what some of those deadlines were. Minister, just in relation to not being eligible, we have a question from Kevin. It's a not-for-profit accommodation, conferencing, school camp, church camp, community group nature of business. It's very difficult for them to switch on overnight when there is the bounce back, and it can take months, and obviously waiting for schools to come back. Will there likely be any form of ongoing support after the lockdown ends?
I know that the Treasurer is working on a series of packages now. Literally, he's working on them, and he'll be making some announcements pretty soon, I think, in relation to what that ongoing support may look like. I don't want to give anything away now, but I know that there is definitely more assistance in the pipeline as we transition out. And look, if I can add my 5 cents worth in relation to this poll in terms of optimism, look, I am bullishly optimistic that we will bounce back stronger than before, because we won't have the cloak, we won't have the monkey on our back anymore, being scared of COVID around the corner. Like, we would have then dealt with it in the same way Europe and many parts of North America and Canada are dealing with it. And we've demonstrated during the last session when we got on top of the situation how strong our economy was. Imagine how strong we will be when we are the first state to open up to the world. We have a massive competitive advantage on all the other states and territories just on that alone, because we will be the first to reach out to the world, the first to bring back tourism, the first to bring back international students, the first to bring back Australians, whether they're from WA, Queensland, or whatever. They'll come in here first. We'll open our arms to them. But whilst they're here, they're going to be eating our food and staying at our places until their states accept them. So I am bullishly optimistic that New South Wales will really come out strong on the other side of this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. And a question again to you, Chris, in relation to a comment from Michelle. If vaccination targets do hit 70% or 80%, but there is then still a residual portion of the community, 20 to 30%, that choose not to get vaccinated, and that's potentially 20 to 30% of a business's customer base. Is there any thinking or modelling around that scenario, Chris?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Randall, is that the 70 and the 80% are the targets proposed and measured by Doherty in terms of what is an acceptable level or more acceptable level of risk to open up. I'm actually quite optimistic. I don't think we'll see the community stop at 70 or 80%. It might take some more time, but certainly from talking to New South Wales and Health and others, there's a genuine interest across the board in people getting vaccinated. So So I don't think we should be pessimistic and say that 80% is where it stops, and there won't be another 10 or 15% that get vaccinated. For the men on the call tonight, I've had it. It doesn't hurt. Men tend to be wimps about getting vaccinations. So if I can do it, anyone can. It's not hard, and I'm not picking up 5G or any other issue at the moment, having had it. But I think we need to be more bullish in terms of the expectations around how many people will get vaccinated. So modelling on 20 or 30, I don't think is helpful at this stage. It's really about, in the short term, giving business and giving the community confidence that a target like 70 or 80% won't see the level of mortality that COVID would otherwise present to the community. So I just don't think it's helpful doing that sort of modelling at this stage. I get the question, but I think we need to understand the background to the 70 and the 80% vaccination.
Fantastic.
And can I just back that in, Randall? Already in areas across New South Wales, we've already got over 80% single dose, and that almost certainly will translate to 80% double dose. So, we are very, very optimistic that we will get way beyond the 80% target. Now, obviously, there's always going to be a 5-10% cohort that, for whatever reason, won't get vaccinated. But it wouldn't surprise me if New South Wales is right up there in terms of the World League tables, in terms of the percentage of the population vaccinated come Christmas time. See if I'm wrong.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. And a fairly common question, but we'll attribute it to Dewey, who's the most recent one to table it. In terms of the wonderful opportunity with the COVID-19 business grant funding, it might be $7,500 or $10,000 or $15,000, obviously a significant amount of money to help a small business under the circumstances. Dewey was just asking, what is the likely time frame from application to receiving the payment? Because when we talk about uncertainty, Dewey's talking about planning. He believes he's eligible, he will apply, he's trying to make plans. What could he expect the time frame to be?
All right, I'm going to hand over otherwise to the amazing Belgan, because she's brilliant. And I think she should say something on this, if you don't mind, Belgan. Otherwise, it's just politicians talking.
Thank you, Minister. And I think my colleague Phyllis had been messaging in the Q&A chat as well. We apologise for any delays in payments, and our teams are working through any of the anomalies that we've had with payment bank details and so forth. What I'd like to do is get your details and have one of our business concierge team reach out to you directly and make sure that we can work through this directly with you, Dewey Lawrence, and make sure that we get that payment out to you as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that response. And Chris, just a quick one again. Obviously, there are issues around insurance, and professional liability is just another question that's been asked.
Yeah, look, insurance has been a big issue for quite some time in Australia, and there are various theories as to what's happened. But my colleague at the federal level, Bruce Bilson, who's the Australian Small Business Family Enterprise Ombudsman, and I and some of the other state commissioners are looking at a review. There's been many reviews, but the market has very much tightened, and the adventure tourism sector has been a victim of that market, and we are a very small market as well, which complicates matters for international underwriters. So watch this space on this, but we do need, unfortunately, some reforms, and many of the reforms are required at a federal level to provide more accessibility and more affordable insurance for small business. But we are aware that the tourism sector, in particular, that adventure tourism sector is doing it really tough in respect to insurance. So we are looking at some solutions there, but we need buy-in from the feds on that, and that's what I'm trying to work with Bruce on at the moment.
And just another layer on the workers' compensation. Obviously, it's a big issue for small business operators. A question: would we look to Europe to see how they have handled workers' compensation insurance? And the concern from this operator is that vaccinated staff attending aged care clients or disabled clients that may be unvaccinated, and still the staff member may acquire COVID-19?
Yeah, look, I think the real challenge, and like I said, I don't want to give too much away because a lot of the stuff is still under consideration, but I think the real challenge will be for part-time and casual staff in respect to workers' comp. Permanent staff obviously have leave in the form of annual leave and sick leave. The issues that we're concerned about is obviously for part-time and casual staff, and particularly those that choose not to be vaccinated, because there's a liability that would then extend under the workers' comp, and obviously the employer will then be an experience rated claim recipient of the workers' comp scheme. So we're looking at that. You know, minister might have different views, but I think the federal government needs to stump up here. COVID is a national issue. It requires, in many respects, a national response. So we are considering a range of options here, but it's just a little too early for me to try and outlay what they might be and what decisions governments might take. But the minister might have a different view on that.
No, I completely agree with you in the sense that, you know, I feel so sorry for the businesses, particularly on the border communities. Like, you know, what do they do? It is almost impossible for them. So I agree. This really needs to be an issue agitated at the national cabinet level. You know, businesses are going through a hard enough time as it is. We don't need to make it harder for them by having different rules and regimes in different states. And given that this is something that every jurisdiction is going to have to deal with, it'd be great to have some uniformity.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. Following on from Adam's question earlier about to what extent would frontline businesses be called upon to enforce any rules, David's concerned as a small business owner that knows his customers extremely well. If the passport comes into play and it's a requirement, he's just concerned about having to turn away customers that he's known for a long time. Any comment on that, Minister?
Yeah, like we're in a pandemic situation. And we know that based on the rates already, we're going to nudge 80% single dose within 6 days, 80%. And I honestly believe that we will really be touching close to 90% around Christmas time. We'll be right up there. Now, sure, there might be 10% of those people in for a period of time. I'm not saying forever, for a period of time until we get the health situation under control, that may not be able to have the same freedoms as those that are vaccinated. But that's their choice. And, you know, and I respect that. That's their choice. But equally, we have to make the right call by the public to say, if you're vaccinated, you can move around because you're not as big a risk or a burden on the hospital system. So, you know, I would say to people under that situation, 90% of your customers are going to be coming through the door, whether it's 70% by October, 80% by November, hopefully 90% by December, touch wood, and then we'll see where we go in terms of the rest of the population. So it's just a matter of time.
Thank you, Minister. Nathaniel, a question for you. Peter was just following on from the commentary around the Picton bypass, and he's just identifying that the residents of Balmoral are still waiting for the rail crossings that were blocked to be opened up again, and just asking when there might be progress on this issue. I note that Lisa Miss Campbell's online. We won't be able to go to her for a response, but if we have to respond later to Peter, we can, Nathaniel. But any comment on the railway crossings in Balmoral?
Yes, well, there could be some announcements shortly, but on the loop line going from Picton all the way to Collowvale, and obviously those rail crossings, letters were sent out by Andrew Moritz, who I think is online today on the webinar from the list I saw earlier, due to obviously when trains eventually, when the line's actually rejuvenated and there's trains on the line, there's certain crossings that volunteers would have to maintain it safe. And some of those crossings have been used for fire trails and things like that, but that consultation is still happening with Council and with Heritage Rail, but we'll have an update on that as that project progresses over the next few months. Fantastic, thank you. Just before we go to closing comments from the Minister, the Commissioner and Nathaniel, a final quick update on the poll. 69% of businesses this evening have their income down by more than 50%.
And in relation to being optimistic, it's 45% yes and 21% no, 34% not sure. And just in relation to grant funding so far, 45% have received it, which I think is fantastic, Minister, and 17% in the pipeline, and there's 14% that haven't applied. So hopefully if they're eligible, they'll be able to make their way forward to apply. Could I just go to the Minister first, and then Chris and Nathaniel for any closing comments?
Oh, well, can I just thank everybody that's participated in this evening, and again, thank the broader community for what they've endured over the last 18 months. I know it's been hellish, particularly with the Wallandilly community. They've gone through enough pain even before COVID, let alone with COVID. So I'm just grateful for their patience. There were difficult times, particularly with service initially as we were building and flying the plane at the same time, but true to services form, they've come good. But I just want to thank the community for hanging in there, and more importantly, for showing real courage in circumstances where every other state had a predisposition to shut down. Our community had a disposition to open up, and I think that sets us good for the future. That's the optimistic mind frame that we really do need to set us to join us with the rest of the world. And let's be honest, New South Wales is that jurisdiction in the country that is on the world stage. So I just want to thank the community for their patience and for their perseverance.
Thank you very much, Minister. Over to you, Chris, some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Randall. Just a plea again, and we've got Belgen and Fitz and the Minister. Please, businesses, don't self-select before actually reading the grant eligibility. We have a lot of cases where businesses are saying, oh, well, I couldn't possibly apply because I didn't have 30% in this period. Please take the time to really understand, get advice if you need it. There's a Business Connect service in the New South Wales government, which is free. And there are Business Connect advisors in the Southern Highlands and in the Illawarra region more broadly to give you advice as to whether you're eligible. But if you're in doubt, ring Service New South Wales and they can talk you through. If you can't get that, ring my office as well. But we hear all too many stories about people saying that they couldn't get grant because they'd self-selected. I know small business are proud people. You don't want to take money from the government, but this is assistance designed with you in mind. It was no fault that your business was closed. That was a decision that was taken on public health reasons. So please access the support that's available to you. Take the time to understand how it can support your business, and don't just look at one individual grant. As I mentioned at the outset, there might be one or more grants that are available to you. And don't forget the Minister's signature measure from last year, the Dine and Discover. Please make sure you're still using and promoting those, because there's still a few of those around, Minister, that can be used.
Absolutely, and there's more coming that way. There's more coming that way.
Fantastic. Nathaniel, closing remarks?
Well, I just want to thank the Minister for coming online. You're an extremely busy Minister, being on the subcommittee across the Cabinet. As I say again, I'll continually campaign to hashtag free Wallandilly from Greater Sydney in lockdown. I think we had a joke about this in Party Room today. I started singing, but we won't repeat that here. But thank you very much for coming on tonight, and thank you to your team from Service New South Wales. Your help has been fantastic. I know you're working around the clock. And I want to thank my staff as well, especially Zoe, Chloe, Matthew, who have really taken on a lot of the brunt of this. And we're not dealing with a black and white situation. There's a lot of grey area. And especially in a seat like mine, which is 3,327 square kilometres, sometimes certain lockdown rules don't fit that in terms of carpooling, because people drive certain places. And so we've been working very hard with the police and the police commands to make sure that, they can look at the public health orders and make decisions that are going to be, consistent with the health orders. But there are some situations where we don't want an apprentice sitting 3 hours on public transport to get to work when he can jump in his boss who lives around the corner. So our office is continually asking for exemptions, and we are working with the local police commands that cover the state seat of Wallumbilla, which is Southern Highlands, Campbelltown, Narellan, and Nepean. So we've got 4 police commands that my seat covers. So it has been complicated. I ask continually for your patience, and I just want to thank the community for your understanding. You did so well during the fires and the floods and drought, because you had it a couple of times. And this is our second hit of the pandemic, and people have been very understanding. And lastly, I'd like to thank Randall for his professionalism. He always does a magnificent job in facilitating these webinars, and we regularly meet on the Southern Highlands Stakeholders Group. And last year, there was a few members on the webinar that were on the New South Wales Task Force, which I set up with Wendy Tuckerman and Peter Siggraves, because our areas are different from metropolitan Sydney. And sometimes the one-size-shoe-all approach doesn't always work in communities like mine. So thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to our panellists, the Minister, the Commissioner. Thank you very much to Belgan and Feliz from Service New South Wales. And thank you very much to all of the participants for being online this evening. Thank you, Nathaniel, for organising it. It was a very helpful information resource sharing opportunity. And also, as Nathaniel had acknowledged and invited, all of those volunteer community members that lead chambers of commerce and industry bodies trying to help small business, which is the backbone of the economy and the largest employer. Thank you to all of those presidents and heads of chambers of commerce and other industry organisations. Good evening, everyone.